Hello, everyone. Today, I'm breaking down a case where the first question investigators asked at the scene wasn't, "Who did this?" It was, "How could something like this possibly be hidden?" In most cases, the evidence is right in front of you. But here, the criminal tried to outsmart basic human anatomy, creating the illusion of a spotless scene where that should have been impossible. West Hollywood, Los Angeles, May 26, 2016. Standing outside an upscale gated apartment complex is Olga. She emigrated from Ukraine, speaks very little English, and has spent the past 3 days in a state of panic. At home, her newborn granddaughter is waiting, while her 29-year-old daughter, Iana Kassian, vanished without a trace 3 days earlier after leaving to meet her former boyfriend. Olga had already reached out to the authorities twice. She even searched for an interpreter so she could clearly explain the situation to the officers. But the system follows its own strict rules. No missing person's body, no direct threats, no search warrant. The responding officers believed it was nothing more than a routine argument between former partners. Just think about how unbelievable that sounds. Someone disappears. A mother is desperately asking for help outside the building. Yet legally, there still isn't enough to justify immediate action. The day before, on May 25th, Olga had come to the same building. As she walked around the property, she noticed that the apartment window she was looking for was slightly open. She stepped closer and loudly called Iana's name. A man's face suddenly appeared in the window. He looked directly at Iana's mother, didn't say a single word, and quietly closed the window. No explanation. No response. You can only imagine what was going through Olga's mind as she realized something was very wrong behind those walls. Finally, on the evening of May 26th, the constant calls from Olga pushed the situation further. Patrol officers return to the apartment complex once again. A security guard gives them a key fob to enter the building. The lock clicks open, but the apartment door won't move. It's secured from the inside with a latch. At that point, there's no longer any doubt that someone is inside. The officers force the door open and carefully step into the apartment. Inside, it's completely dark. Every blind is fully closed. The air conditioner is running at full blast, making the entire apartment feel like a walk-in refrigerator. They clear the living room, the kitchen, and the balcony. Nothing. Then they continue farther inside. The door leading to the hallway with the bedrooms is locked and barricaded from the other side. The officers force their way through. In the first guest bedroom, they immediately notice a mattress pulled off the bed, visible bloodstains on the headboard, and clear signs that a serious struggle had taken place. Farther down the hallway is the primary bedroom. It's barricaded with the missing mattress. As the officers try to get inside, a man's voice suddenly comes from behind the barrier. The owner of the apartment refuses to come out, claiming he's afraid the officers will shoot him. They try to calm the situation, explaining that they simply need to make sure the young woman is safe. Without showing any emotion, the man replies that she isn't there and says she's at the hospital. He even gives them a fake room number, hoping to draw them away from the apartment. Only after lengthy negotiations through his personal accountant does the door finally crack open. 34-year-old Blake Liebel steps into the hallway, wearing only his underwear. Fresh scratches, cuts, and bite marks are clearly visible on his body. But that's not what catches the officer's attention. Blake is smiling, calmly, confidently, and without a hint of concern. The officers enter the primary bedroom. On the bed, covered with a baby blanket, lies Iana. And this is where investigators run into a forensic mystery. With injuries this severe, the room should have been covered in blood. Instead, It's remarkably clean. Where did the physical evidence disappear to during those 3 days? And who exactly was this smiling millionaire? To understand how that smiling man ended up at the center of one of the most baffling forensic puzzles investigators had ever seen, we need to rewind the story and follow every event in order. In 2011, Blake Liebel lost his mother to cancer. She left behind an estate worth $12 million, dividing it among family members. Blake inherited half, but that wasn't enough for him. A series of bitter family disputes quickly followed. He sued both his father and his own brother, aggressively demanding a larger share of the inheritance. He rushed to sell off the properties he had received in Florida and Toronto, permanently damaging his relationships with the rest of the family. After losing those legal battles and spending through what remained of his inheritance, he became increasingly isolated. He cut off longtime friends, stayed locked inside his home, and slipped deeper into paranoia. He became convinced that his brother's creditors were about to break into his mansion over unpaid gambling debts. By then, the Canadian-born Blake was married to a former model named Amanda. They lived in a luxurious mansion, but the image of success was being financed almost entirely by what remained of his mother's money. For 8 years, she had been sending her son $18,000 every month. Blake used that money to present himself as a creative visionary, but nearly every project ended in failure. A comedy film he directed was a major flop and received overwhelmingly negative reviews. His attempts to launch a comic book studio also failed to gain any recognition. In 2014, Iana Kassian moved from Ukraine to the United States. She worked as an interpreter, picked up modeling jobs on the side, and was focused on building a stable future. Before long, her path crossed with Blake's. On the surface, he seemed like the perfect partner, a wealthy heir with connections in Hollywood's film industry. In the summer of 2015, another revealing chapter unfolded. Blake's wife, Amanda, was 8 months pregnant with their daughter. Without warning, Blake packed his belongings and erased Amanda from his life. The reason was obvious. He had become deeply involved with Iana. He comes on strong from the very beginning. He assures Iana that his previous marriage is completely over and that an official divorce is only a matter of time. Almost immediately, he buys her a separate apartment, gives her a luxury car, and covers every one of her living expenses. Iana makes one thing clear. She has no interest in being someone's secret girlfriend. She sees a generous man who appears ready to build a new family, and she agrees to move in with him. Just 1 month later, Blake's estranged wife gives birth to their daughter completely on her own. Around the same time, Iana discovers she's expecting as well. Without realizing it, she's caught in a golden cage. Financial dependence, living in a foreign country, and the arrival of her own daughter leave her with very few options, tying her even more closely to an unstable partner who has always believed money could buy people's loyalty. By the fall of 2015, while Iana is preparing for the arrival of her daughter, Blake begins repeating the same pattern. He starts a secret relationship with a screenwriter named Constance. Once again, he follows the same playbook. He buys her an apartment and moves another mistress into it. This relationship lasts only a couple of weeks. Blake quickly loses interest, but he allows Constance to continue living there. This is the part of the story that genuinely surprised me. Have you ever noticed how bitter enemies sometimes join forces when they have a common goal? Constance, rejected by Blake and dealing with serious legal problems of her own, becomes completely consumed by her obsession with him. Eventually, she reaches out to Amanda, Blake's first wife. The two women quickly form an unexpected and deeply toxic alliance. But instead of directing their anger toward the man who caused all the broken relationships, they focus on Iana, who has no idea any of this is happening behind the scenes. Blake's former wife and former mistress begin exchanging messages regularly, discussing plans for revenge and insulting the young woman from Ukraine. In April 2016, shortly before Iana gives birth, she and Blake take a vacation to Hawaii. During that trip, Constance hires a private investigator to follow them and forwards the reports to Amanda. In one of her messages, she openly says she intends to have the new mother deported. Meanwhile, Iana remains completely unaware that a circle of resentment is quietly closing around her. On May 3rd, Diana is born. Iana's mother, Olga, flies to California to help care for her granddaughter. She temporarily moves into a modest apartment nearby. And it's after Iana returns home from the hospital that Blake's behavior changes dramatically. His everyday routine becomes increasingly disturbing. He keeps the blinds closed around the clock and cranks the air conditioning to its highest setting, turning the apartment into an icebox. He openly uses prohibited substances just a few feet away from Diana's crib. When Iana objects, Blake responds with a harsh ultimatum. He demands that Olga take care of Diana full-time, while insisting that Iana immediately return to her role as his partner. On May 20th, when Diana is only 17 days old, everything changes. Constance follows through on her threat. She goes to law enforcement and files a formal complaint, accusing Blake of sexual misconduct. The Canadian heir is immediately taken into custody. While sitting in jail, he makes what may be the biggest mistake of his life. To me, this moment says more about his mindset than anything else in the case. He is so convinced he has complete control over the women around him that he asks one of them to get money from another. Blake calls Iana and demands that she contact Amanda immediately to help post his $100,000 bail. That forced conversation tears away the last remaining illusion. Speaking directly with Amanda for the first time, Iana finally puts all the pieces together. She realizes Blake had lied to her from the very beginning and learns that while building a life with her, he had also been involved with Constance. That was the breaking point. Iana immediately packs her belongings, takes Diana, and moves into her mother's apartment. When Blake is released on bail, he comes home to an empty apartment. Think about that for a second. For the first time in his life, a man who had always relied on money to buy loyalty is faced with a firm rejection, one that can't be erased with a bank check. On May 23rd, 3 days after leaving Blake, Iana and Olga spend the day shopping. They're calmly picking out a stroller, making plans for a safer future without the toxic relationship. Then, out of nowhere, Iana receives a series of text messages. The exact contents have never been made public, but whatever was written has an immediate impact. Her expression changes instantly. Clearly shaken, she tells Olga that she has to meet Blake right away. Leaving Diana with her grandmother at the shopping mall, she drives to the luxury apartment complex in West Hollywood. No one ever saw her alive again. The next day, Olga calls her daughter's phone over and over, but every call goes straight to voicemail. We've already gone through the critical 3 days that followed. While Olga desperately tried to break through the system's procedural delays and get someone to act. Now let's look at what forensic investigators discovered after Blake was taken into custody, and they were finally able to examine the apartment in detail. What's the first thing an experienced investigator thinks when walking into the scene of a serious crime and finding virtually no visible biological evidence? The answer is simple. Someone spent a long time cleaning. the forensic team begins a meticulous search. Instead of focusing on the obvious chaos, the overturned furniture, and signs of a struggle that caught the patrol officers' attention, they concentrate on the places most people would overlook. Inside a trash can, they discover a blood-stained razor and a thick clump of freshly cut hair. Investigators move into the bathroom. Water is still running from the faucet into the large soaking tub. Resting at the bottom is a discarded kitchen knife. Crime scene technicians remove the plastic drain pipes beneath the sink and the bathtub. Inside the traps, they find a thick mixture of biological material and powerful cleaning chemicals. The criminal had deliberately used running water to wash evidence deep into the city's sewer system. So where did the bulk of the contaminated items go? The answer is found well outside the apartment. While searching the building's common hallway, detectives open the heavy metal trash chute. They make their way down to the basement, where the building's waste collection room is located. There, they discover 11 tightly sealed plastic bags. The contents of those bags explain almost everything. Inside are towels soaked through, blood-stained clothing, and fragments of scalp tissue. The apartment's owner had simply dropped everything down the trash chute, hoping the city's sanitation crews would haul the dumpsters away before authorities arrived. Among everything recovered, forensic specialists carefully collect the most important piece of evidence: a stained bedspread. On the light-colored fabric is a clear, bloody impression of a man's hand. That handprint has one very distinctive feature. The print is missing the upper section of the little finger. Investigators don't even need to spend hours searching criminal databases. All they have to do is look at the hands of the man who was just brought into the police station. Blake is missing part of his right little finger. On top of that, investigators notice fresh, deep bite marks on both of his forearms. Blake sits in the interview room at a metal table. He doesn't even ask for an attorney. He isn't emotional. He isn't panicking. The same relaxed smile remains on his face. When the lead investigator asks him directly who was responsible for what happened to the mother of his daughter, Blake gives a short, emotionless reply. Science will tell us who did it. That's where we left off in the last part of this story, with Blake's chilling statement. Science will tell us who did it. As it turned out, forensic science did exactly that. And the conclusions were so disturbing that even veteran investigators with decades of experience were shaken. When the medical examiner began the autopsy, one detail stood out immediately. Ayanna's body was unusually pale. The average adult has roughly 5 to 6 liters of blood. In Ayanna's body, the remaining volume measured little more than a teaspoon. The examiner reached a devastating conclusion. She had still been alive throughout much of what had happened. The official medical findings identified extreme blood loss as the primary factor that led to her death. Dense foam found inside her nasal passages also indicated that her face had been held underwater for an extended period. After reviewing all of the medical evidence, specialists estimated that the continuous ordeal lasted somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. When investigators processed the apartment with luminol, an entirely different picture emerged. Even after an extensive cleanup, the guest bedroom and the bathroom lit up under forensic light. It became clear why the large soaking tub had played such an important role. Running water kept the blood from clotting, carrying crucial evidence straight into the sewer system. In cases like this, the defense often argues that the suspect was suffering from a severe, drug-induced psychotic episode. But Blake's toxicology report told a different story. It showed only minimal traces of marijuana. He was fully aware of his actions and understood exactly what he was doing. And this is where the case takes an even more disturbing turn. Phone records revealed that during those same 8 hours, Blake ordered food delivery twice. Through the delivery app, he carefully instructed both drivers to leave the bags outside the door and not ring the doorbell under any circumstances. While systematically taking the life of the mother of his daughter, he calmly stepped outside between events to pick up takeout containers. Just imagine that level of calculated composure. But one question still remained. Why go to such lengths to remove the blood? Why the deliberate focus on the scalp? The answer was hidden in Blake's past. 6 years earlier, he had published an adult graphic novel called Syndrome. At the time, it was a commercial failure. Now, it became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. The cover featured a doll with its scalp removed, exposing the skull beneath, the same highly unusual injury documented in the real case. The story followed a doctor studying serial offenders. In one of the book's central scenes, victims were suspended upside down so their blood could slowly drain away. When investigators interviewed Blake's co-author, Robert Ryan, they uncovered the missing piece of the puzzle. Blake hadn't simply financed the project. He had spent years studying notorious serial offenders and personally directed many of the scenes in the book. Ryan recalled one particular moment during their collaboration. Blake suddenly jumped out of his chair and threw his hands into the air in celebration after coming up with a scene involving the complete draining of a victim's blood. According to Ryan, that concept was something Blake was especially proud of. That revelation completely undermined the defense's strategy. Investigators were no longer looking at an impulsive emotional breakdown after a failed relationship. Instead, they saw what appeared to be the methodical execution of a scenario that had existed for years, a story that had remained on paper until its author allegedly decided to bring those fantasies into the real world. Now let's put the evidence together and reconstruct the timeline of that day. On May 23rd, Iana walks into Blake's luxury apartment after receiving a series of urgent messages from him. Based on the forensic evidence, investigators concluded that the attack did not begin near the front door. Blake intentionally led her into the guest bedroom. That's where the first violent struggle took place. Iana fought desperately to survive, biting her attacker's arms as she resisted. Blake ripped the mattress from the bed, struck her repeatedly in the head, and then used a bladed weapon. He then carries the injured, but still alive, Iana into the bathroom. He places her in the large soaking tub and turns on the faucet. As her life slowly slips away down the drain, the criminal begins methodically cleaning the apartment. Armed with industrial-strength cleaning chemicals, he spends hours scrubbing the walls of the guest bedroom as if he were doing ordinary housework. He stuffs the contaminated clothing and other items into plastic trash bags, then drops them down the building's trash chute a few bags at a time. For hours, he moves with almost mechanical precision, showing no emotion and no sign of panic. Nearly 8 hours later, it is over. Blake lifts Iana from the water, carefully rinses her body, and carries her into the primary bedroom. He gently places her on clean baby sheets, covers her with a blanket, and simply lies down beside her. He remains there for the next several days, with the same unsettling calm, ignoring Olga's phone calls and repeated knocks at the door until patrol officers finally force their way inside. Blake Liebel's trial began in June 2018. His defense team tried to portray him as a man who had suffered a complete psychological breakdown under extreme stress. But the court-appointed forensic psychiatrist dismantled that argument, concluding that Blake was fully competent and understood his actions at the time of the crime. The jury didn't deliberate for long. After just 3 hours, they returned with their verdict: guilty. His sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. He avoided the death penalty only because prosecutors chose not to seek it. One detail stood out during the trial. Blake's older brother attended court every single day. His father, however, never appeared once, having completely cut his son out of his life. What happened to everyone else connected to this case? Constance's mental health continued to deteriorate. She sent hundreds of threatening messages to Blake's first wife, Amanda, as well as to his accountant. After doctors diagnosed her with severe schizophrenia, the court set aside her prison sentence and ordered her into long-term psychiatric treatment. The Canadian millionaire's family never attempted to contact Diana after everything that happened. In a separate civil case, the court ordered Blake to pay Ayana's family $41 million in damages, but Olga never received a single dollar. Unable to afford staying in the United States, she eventually returned to Ukraine with her granddaughter, where they began rebuilding their lives. You know what stands out to me most after reading the interrogation transcripts? Sitting across from investigators, Blake made one remarkably cynical statement. "Women don't love me. If it weren't for the money, they wouldn't love me." That one sentence says everything. Most of us expect danger to come from someone lurking in a dark alley. Instead, this devastating crime was committed by a man with unlimited credit cards and enormous wealth. Money didn't turn him into the creative genius he wanted the world to see. It simply paid for a convincing image that hid a calculating predator for years. And that mask finally came off the moment he realized that, for the first time in his life, there was something money could no longer buy.